Well, good afternoon to each of you. And first of all, thank you, Sonny, for the invitation to be here, and I'm absolutely delighted to be here this evening. And thank you and the Good Neighbor Foundation for having a vision to put forth an effort like this. It's awfully important. What I do know firsthand is Sonny is very passionate about issues surrounding Americans of Korean ancestry, and I can speak to that. But he gave me a topic, and I had to think about it a little bit, Korean Americans I know. And I had to think about that a little bit. I wasn't sure where he wanted me to go with that. But let me talk first a little bit about my military background, not very briefly. I served in the military for more than 35 years around the world. I started out in Vietnam as a young second lieutenant and a captain. And after about 20 years, I was reassigned back to Asia as a one-star general. And when I returned back to Asia, I was assigned to Hawaii, where I was responsible in the strategic planning and policy for an engagement strategy. We had 36 nations out there that were responsible for, as we called it, engaging, and that strategy is still out there. So those are all the nations out in the Pacific Rim. And I'm talking about China and Korea and Japan and Thailand and Singapore and Malaysia and India and Hong Kong and Philippines and Australia, and you can keep going. But that was our mission, to engage them. And I spent a bit of time in many of those countries, like Papua New Guinea, I didn't mention, but I was in many of those little countries. From Hawaii, I was assigned to Korea. And someone asked me that question earlier, how did I get to Korea? Did Korea find me, or did I find Korea? Well, it was really interesting. It was a combination. I was in Hawaii, and I was told I was going to command the 25th Infantry Division in Hawaii. I get this call about the time I thought I was going to be changing command. Gomo, Jessica knows that it's called General Ulster Management, and they do the assignments. And I got this call, and they said, hold on for the Chief of Staff. And Denny Reimer was the Chief of Staff at the time. And at that point, we thought we were going to war in Korea. In fact, we were told we were going to war. We just had, as many of you may recall, we had the submarine to come in and land. We had this one helicopter that flew over the DMZ. And we had another stupid thing up at the Panmunjom. So we were just convinced we were going to war in the next 60 to 90 days. So I was given 30 days to pack up from Hawaii, and you're going to Korea. And that's what happened. I packed up. I went to Korea to join the 2nd Infantry Division as the Assistant Division Commander. But that's how I got to Korea the first time. I spent 3 years, and I served there as a 1-star and a 2-star general. The first half I was up at Camp Casey, and where we had responsibility at that time for the DMZ. We have now turned that over to the ROK Army. And then I was moved down to Yongsan in Seoul, where I had responsibility as a CJG3. Now, what is a bunch of gobbledygook to you, but I wore 4 hats, and those hats had to do with what we did. So I had a US hat on, that was United States Army. I had a joint hat on that was for the joint. I had a combined hat on for between the ROKs and the US, and then I had a United Nations hat on. And for each of those, I had a deputy. But I was responsible for the operations of that theater. And to include the United Nations Command. So I really worked at the highest levels there. And what I learned was to appreciate and understand the Korean people and the culture. So from Korea, I went back to the Pentagon again, and then to Germany. And from Germany, I went into the Balkans, and then back to the Pentagon. And from there, I went to become the commander of United States Army Forces Command, which is in Atlanta, Georgia. And that's how I ended up in Atlanta. So that's my nexus to Sonny Park. But I took you through my brief military history for a reason, and I want to show you my long association with Asia and Korea in particular. My association with the Korean community runs through my military service in in South Korea, and through my good friend Sonny Park. So I get to see the Korean community through the eyes of Sonny Park. We are close family, friends, and ties. We share important American holidays at each other's homes. Our families have vacationed together overseas in China and in Korea. Our families celebrate major events together. Our family celebrated the wedding of my daughter in Jamaica, and his family was there. Sonny's daughter in California, we were there. Sonny's son in Michigan, we were there. We eat together often. We go to sports events together. We're business partners. So I get to see a good portion of the lives of Americans of Korean ancestry. And it's been quite illuminating. So back to my charter here was the Korean Americans I know. In Atlanta, I've been active with the Good Neighboring Foundation, which is hosting and sponsoring this event, as well as something we call the American Korean Friendship Society. And that's an organization that seeks to further relations between the peoples of the United States and the people of South Korea. And as Sonny's urging, I chaired that organization for 5 years. And the organization is still in great standing. But I must tell you that Sonny Park has an ongoing affair of the heart with these two organizations we just mentioned. And when I say an affair of the heart, he puts everything he has into the Good Neighboring Foundation and the American Korean Friendship Foundation. So, by association, I have an affair of the heart with these organizations. That's why I'm here today. I served almost half of my career overseas. So almost 36 years, but almost half of that I was overseas. I wasn't in the United States, just for a matter of a point. But no matter where I was assigned around the world, no matter what country I happened to be in, no matter the might of that country, I found a commonality amongst the peoples. And I found they wanted to earn a living. They wanted the best for the kids and their families. And they were also very patriotic in most cases, but they dreamed of coming to live in America. So, when I lived among the Korean people, I found they too had similar aspirations. For those Americans of Korean ancestry who came to America, they have the opportunity to fulfill their dreams. But the dream comes in two segments. And I think those Americans of Korean ancestry, you fulfilled that first segment. You are in America. You've immigrated to America. It is that second segment of the dream, and that's the piece, Sonny doesn't like this word, assimilation. It's a word, he says, I hate that word. But it's the assimilation piece we must focus on if you're ever going to fulfill your dream of living in America and living on that shining city on the hill that you've heard so much about. I still talk about the Korean Americans I know. Let me start by saying the Americans of Korean ancestry is a fast-growing portion of the U.S. population. Sonny just showed you some of those numbers, especially in our large metropolitan areas, New York, California, and LA, Atlanta, Northern Virginia. But those are the fastest-growing regions in the metro areas. And they all came here. You all came here for a number of reasons, but almost always they came in search of the American way of life. That's why we came. Now, through the eyes of Sonny, the older generation came with the intention of becoming Americans and becoming fully assimilated, like most immigrants that come to America. But the dream seems to evade the older generation. Too many remain confined to their communities where they work long hours and continue to endure hardships. Too many of the old generation have lived in America a lifetime but still do not speak English fluently. Too many are not involved in the lives in the community. and too many are not involved in the political lives. Now, the younger generation, there's hope, tends to be more assimilated into the American society. Although Korean immigrants have become well known as successful businessmen, this stereotype is far from reality. The majority of Korean-owned, and I'm calling them mom and pop stores, that struggle to make ends meet. Although some businesses have been very successful, and we have many of you in this room in that category. Many of the mom and pop stores are located in Koreatowns and in the African American and low-income communities. There's a high degree of resentment bred against the Koreans by some of the African Americans, and they perceive the Korean merchants as outsiders who exploit their communities. While there may be some truth to this in terms of exploitation, the Korean American merchant too struggles to make ends meet in many cases. The two groups have different perceptions about America and being successful. Being an independent businessman represents success in the African American community, while it is nothing more than an avenue of making a living for many of our Korean Americans. And it really does not necessarily always provide them an avenue to move up on the economic ladder. But more visible to the community and the American society at large are those professional occupations, and many of those are sitting around this table in here today. Your engineers, and your doctors, and your lawyers, and the nurses, and the pharmacists, and a few very successful businessmen. You're in here. In Atlanta, the American Korea Friendship Society celebrates this group each year as examples of successful assimilation. And we have an annual banquet each year. And the likes of, you saw there, Sammy Lee, that story is just phenomenal. If you don't know it, you ought to read it. Dr. John O, Dr. Tom Kim, Dr. Peter Ray. And then the military and civic leaders like B.J. Pak, who was the U.S. Attorney in Georgia, General Yo, Colonel Young Ok Him, Steve Sterling, and there are many, many others. And I'd invite you to come down to our ceremony. Each year we have one. And this organization, believe it or not, we invite people who have assimilated. And we give them a stipend. He gives them $10,000 or $20,000 to donate to the charity of their choice. But these are people like you who made it. But despite the growing number of Americans of Korean ancestry, especially in the professional occupations, American Koreans as a group struggle to assimilate in the United States. Sonny told me that. He told me to talk about it. That's why I put it in here. The Korean American community remains detached from the American political mainstream more than any other ethnic group. And we are working hard to change this. This is why we're here today. We're working hard to change it. I maintain it still requires staying focused and carrying out your patriotic duty as an American. And I can define those two. Focused and carrying out your patriotic duty. These are the Americans of Korean ancestry I know. Perhaps President Ronald Reagan said it best in his farewell address, and I quote, "I've spoken of the shining city all my political life. In my mind, it was a tall, proud city built on rocks stronger than oceans, windswept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds of living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be a city walls, the walls had doors, and the doors were open to everyone with the will and the heart to get here." That's how I saw it, and I see it still in the quote, and that was from Ronald Reagan. And I'll stop there, but those are the Korean Americans that I know. And I don't know if I hit the question, Sonny, or not, but he asked me to talk about the Koreans, Americans that I know. And those are the ones I know. But thank you for the opportunity, Sonny.